Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today I'm joined with Alison Moss, who's a senior SEO analyst in the iGaming industry. Alison, good to see you. How are you?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. I'm very excited to be talking with you today about getting things implemented, getting SEO tickets shipped. And, someone like yourself who's been involved within big teams and have sort of been through these conversations and discussions, I think what better person to really have a chat about this topic today. So, why don't we get started with a bit of context from your side in terms of how it's been from you working within teams of all sorts of different people and roles and really try to sort of push the SEO tickets forward or at least, get things implemented.
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting experience for me as I kind of moved into well, more from a content end, which is what I did before I kind of went into SEO, into kind of SEO and then also very much into the technical side of things. I've always been fairly tech savvy. And I've always kind of been one of the people who, even when I worked in the content teams, kind of got involved a lot with like what if we had issues, how to resolve them, and that kind of thing. Bit of a problem solver type person. So it kind of came quite easily to me kind of stepping more into that technical area. Obviously so much to learn when you're going through that, but because I've always been a bit of a problem solver, it was quite a good area for me personally to go into. Um, Now, I've worked. I work in a large company and we have lots of teams. And so, one of the main things that you really have to get to grips with very early on is that you are not the only team that wants the resource. And so, that's where you really have to start honing how you deal with your technical issues and technical requests to get them shipped and get them out, because you are competing often with a lot of other teams and areas, especially in a world like iGaming, where your product is online. The dev resource is often very much skewed towards improving the actual product, and making sure that that's working as it should do, because that's obviously the main area of the business. And so you, as a marketing SEO team, um, sometimes have to go up against some big business priorities to be able to get tickets shipped. So that's where I really honed more of my skills around how to get things shipped and how to get things done. I hope
Okay,
that
let's
answers.
not waste any time. So how do you get this done and how do you find getting these shipped? But maybe even before that, what sort of, and I suppose to try and get a perspective for people who either they're in big teams themselves or maybe not, or maybe they're sort of thinking in their careers to, join a big company that's well established, loads of teams. What sort of teams do you find typically get most of the resource by default, just so people can sort of see maybe who they should become friends with, or at least so that they have an understanding and not sort of go in with the naivety that, they're the most important person in the business, because most of the time, probably all of the time, they're not, right? So like what sort of instances have you seen from your experience with that?
So when you're working as part of a big business, you're probably not going to have direct contact with the developers, per se. They're not necessarily the people actually dictating the priority of work that's coming in. That will often sit with someone else. In my case, and in many other cases, you might have a product development team. So they will be the ones that kind of get all of the input from all the different areas, as well as themselves planning what the future of specific products look like, to be able to kind of figure out what's the priorities for the business. And what you'll find a lot of the time is that the product improvements will often get, top priority, which makes complete sense, to keep up to keep up to speed and keep introducing new things, keep things exciting, the product obviously needs to be taken care of and improved. So it's really how um, get involved with that team and how you position things to that team that can really help you get things shipped forward, because um, it's great having a great product, and that will get you very far um, often. So, especially in the age of AI, if you've got a good product, it's a very good starting point. But um, without kind of the support that they need from our perspective, then showing up in search engines and LLMs is maybe not gonna go as well. And if you can't reach that audience, or as much of that audience as you possibly can, who are, especially if they're actually looking for something specific, like a specific betting product or a specific gaming product, then they're gonna that product's not necessarily going to get the eyes on it that it should do, that they've been working on. So there's um, ways of positioning things so that you can certainly get things done. But yeah, product development teams and also development kind of team leader type areas are great contacts to kind of make within a larger business. But bear in mind that often the actual development teams themselves may not be setting the priorities. You can talk to them about how important something is, and they will be talking about delegating resource. But if you're competing against higher priority tickets, they're not going to actually be able to put that resource onto something unless the person setting the priorities is actually on board.
Sure. And so from the ticket specific standpoint, what are some of the ways that you either create the tickets to make them be deemed a higher priority, or just general tips that you have for getting these tickets shipped? Like, what's your usual workflow or process around this?
So there's a couple of different things to remember, which is when you're dealing with these, especially in a large business like this, is yes, you've got that first level of prioritization to go through, but then you've also got the developers themselves that need to be able to implement it effectively. Because what you don't want to do is get your ticket put in, it gets worked on, it gets released, and then you find out that what they've implemented isn't actually what what you yourself was thinking of, because developers will work with the knowledge they've got. And from my experience, not every developer has much SEO knowledge at all, so they often do need like quite a lot of help in terms of understanding why and what it is that you're trying to achieve, from an SEO perspective. And there's kind of like, I sort of try and combine those two things into one good ticket. So you'll often kind of start off with how do you get it through to the developers in the first place. So that's where your product development team or your prioritization team will come in, and then you've got the actual technical implementation, which is where you also need to make sure that you've been really clear about what you want within that ticket. So one of the things that I would say is, if you work in a big business, there's the probability is there is already some kind of template that people use for this. So definitely easy cheat code, go get your hands on that. That will give you like a really good starting point for how is easiest for people in those roles to get that information through, because not everyone's the same. I've read a lot of great stuff online about how to put together great SEO tickets, and none of that stuff is wrong. It's just that then when I've come to implement it myself, it's just maybe not quite matching up with how my business actually usually gets that information. So I think a great starting point is just ask those people who are in charge of prioritization, in charge of, who do, because they will generally often be submitting the actual ticket into a ticketed system per se. So I don't personally put something into a project management system that the developers use. They will do that. So I send them sort of like a template, and then they will input that in. So that's why it's really important, because they're also not SEO experts. They're relying on me for that information. So it has to be really clear what I send them, so that they've got a good enough understanding as to why it's important, but then also then they know that putting it into the developers queue, they're going to understand what you're after as well. So yeah, get a template at first if you can. That will just make life a little bit easier. for you and for them. And that's ultimately what you want. You want their life to be as easy as possible so that they can just look at it, something they're really familiar with, check the key points and go, yep, I understand that goes into the priority stack for the entire workflow for the business here. That goes in. I can understand that's urgent. That's got to go in at, second or third within this queue of work, or this one's maybe, this is a nice to have for the next 6 months. Let's put that in a bit lower down. It's not going to then interrupt anything else that you've got that is higher priority within there. So yeah, get yourself a good template. If the business doesn't have one, then there are so many great guides online on how to do it. Gus has some really great info on how to put together a good SEO ticket and some of the key fields that are good to use if you don't have a template already. But generally, in a bigger business, you probably will already have like a preferred template for these things. And then, yeah, um, key thing is going to be getting that business case together. So the bit that the product developers or whoever's in charge of your prioritization is going to need to know is, what's the business case here? How does this impact the goals of the business? If it's an issue, what's the impact from a customer standpoint, a user, a search engine standpoint plus a user standpoint. What's the business implication then overall? So is it something that's um, really impacting customers' UX from a search engine? Are they getting to the wrong place? Because that's obviously going to be really important to the business if people aren't able to get to the right areas. That's something that's probably going to be maybe a higher priority to them than potentially having maybe a bit of content's not pulling through correctly on a page. It's those two things are going to be very different in terms of how the business views them. So you've got to be really clear about what the business impact is. So that's from a user perspective and from a search engine perspective, and be really clear about what that could mean. Sometimes it can be difficult in SEO to give like a really solid answer about what this will do, because sometimes you'd be like, well, it could do this, but it might take a week, it might take 6 months, but this could happen. So I'll usually err on the side of caution with trying to make sure that people are aware that the could happens are, something that could happen very quickly if you're not careful. And so anything like indexing and error response codes and things like that that could impact your overall site as a um, even if it's something that could happen 6 months down the line. I always try and put that in as a this potentially could happen next week if you're not careful. It just depends how fast it gets interpreted and or things get seen. um, so yeah, really really important to get a good business case together. Um, if you've got a business that's really nice and clear about their objectives, that's brilliant. Tie things in as much as you possibly can if you've got um and if you've got really clear KPIs and things like that, and if you can tie things into money, revenue, that makes life really easy for people prioritizing things. If you can actually tie it into um, this is going to potentially impact how much money the business makes because of XYZ. This is how much we get at the moment. If this thing happened, this issue's now here. This is how much it's going to cost the business if it carries on. Then that's really going to help them with prioritization, because they can very easily balance monetary stuff up against other areas of the business. So that's really really handy to be able to do. Um, but yeah, so make sure you've got your good business case and how it impacts kind of all levels, so they can really understand the benefit of it if it's something that's more of a new improvement type thing rather than an issue as well. Make sure you're kind of trying to tie it into what positive impact, like how much money the business can make out of if you do this thing potentially. And yeah, or all those kind of things. There's so much obviously, but I'd say a lot of it is, boils down to what's the user impact, what's the business impact, and ideally, if you can tie it into business targets and revenue anything like that. Those are going to be like some of the key things that really give your prioritization team something to work on that compares against what other areas of the business are proposing as well.
Awesome. Yeah, there was a lot of info there in different areas. I do like the concept initially of trying to find templates and not just sort of like draft something up in your head, because chances are it might not be exactly one to one like the business would be used to, or how the business wants to have these tickets created. So I think that's a really good point. And then also what you're mentioning there about when you're writing these tickets, the concepts of prioritization, or to understand at least what are the things that the business cares about the most, which may be able to help you in terms of maybe the prioritization from the business's perspective in terms of getting your tickets shipped. Something I want to ask as well is, what do you find the biggest mistake to be when it comes to getting tickets shipped? So anything that, and I'm not necessarily coming at it from the point of, things that you can't control, because you can't control if the dev team are busy on hundreds of other things. You can't control if they're away. But in terms of the things that you can control, what are some, or what is the most critical kind of mistake to avoid when it comes to trying to get your ticket shipped?
So it's probably less about getting them shipped and more about the end result, which is having sometimes maybe being too vague in your requests. So you might be able to convince product development team that, let's, for example, just say, something really, really basic, but something that I've certainly come across is I just want very basic standard. I want a canonical on a page, right? Easy. As an SEO, you think very easy concept, right? But if you just tell a developer I want a canonical on a page, there's certain things that they're going to do and certain things that they might not do. So they might well just, well, they don't really necessarily know what a canonical is. So the first question they're probably gonna ask is, "What the hell is that?" Um, what I found is often, they will just kind of work off the knowledge that they've got. It's not always the best at going and, kind of finding things out for themselves, which is why I always try and give like a really complete idea of what something is, and mainly from past experience of asking for things in quite a basic way, and then what's been implemented doesn't fully fit, might fit to a degree, but then not fully. So then you end up with additional types of issues off the back of that. So with canonicals, for example, not stripping off um, additional parameters and things like that. You tell them I want a self-referential canonical. Well, they're going to do that on every page. So if you've got, like jump links or any affiliate parameters and bits and bobs like that that might get, or just device parameters, UTMs, anything that gets added onto the end, they're just going to have given you your self-referential canonical. So, now you've got duplicate page issues. Um, Bits and bobs like that. So that's just like a very basic example, but it just goes to kind of show that, like, even something that feels really basic to you as an SEO, make sure that you are fleshing out the end result. You're not telling them how to technically implement something. You certainly don't need to know that level of detail of it, but there are things that you might want to do. Like, for example, you probably don't want them to do it using JavaScript. You probably want to make sure that you want to make sure that's done server side. So there's little bits and bobs that you want to do. There's a great concept within each kind of ticket that you do from a technical standpoint is usually using acceptance criteria. I find that very useful. Um, Being able to put on exactly that, because there you can put lots of different scenarios and what the result should be in each of those scenarios, and that's going to give the developer a really good idea of where the end point is, so that then they can work back from that to figure out what the technical implementation should be from there. And so, you're looking at adding there, you can be like acceptance criteria, um, canonical loads in the DOM, canonical is self-referential, canonical, removes parameters and is self-referential, but to the bare URL, just bits and bobs like that that you can then give them, and they've got then them. And also, if you've got any testing teams that will use that information as well to test things off before it goes live, because it's all well and good getting something through to the dev team, but if what they then implement actually causes more issues, then you could end up even potentially in a worse situation than you were to begin with. So yeah, it can be. I would say that is also really, really key in terms of some of the mistakes I certainly made earlier on in my career moving into technical was being maybe just um, a little bit too broad, because I made assumptions that developers and people within those development teams would already have an understanding of these technical concepts, but they don't necessarily. And if you're looking um, for anything that's more bespoke as well, say you work in an area like I do, where there's a hell of a lot of regulation across different markets, there are sort of more potentially more bespoke things that you might want to do technically. So you just need to make sure you're being really clear about the end result of where you want to be. I think acceptance criteria is like a really great one, because you can just go through all those different scenarios in your head that you know about, but potentially a developer's never gonna, or your development team and your test team may never even have thought of, and it will give them the opportunity to fully understand what it is that you're asking for.
No, that's brilliant. I think that is a really great answer, and you covered a lot there. And it's great that you sort of use these examples like the canonical ones, because it does get quite easy for people who are in the trenches doing the work day in day out to make the assumption that what you're doing is common knowledge around the business, but the reality is often very different from that. So I think it's a great point of what you mentioned there in terms of like being specific enough to be able to make sure that there's no ambiguity or potential questions or issues or back and forth, because at the end of the day that delays things as well, right? But Alison, I wanted to ask, in case anyone has any questions or wants to reach out to you, where can they find you? Because I think obviously you've got lots of experience within SEO and of course in terms of working with teams and stuff. So where can people find you in case they want to reach out and ask questions?
LinkedIn's probably the best channel. Feel free to follow me on there. I don't post too much at the moment. I'm I'm quite busy. It's the iGaming world's a lot of fun, especially at this time of year around this specific 2026 year, around the World Cup and things like that. So I haven't really been posting much on there, but I want to do a bit more on there. I'm hoping to do a bit of a follow-up article on this topic soon. So if people are really interested in this specific topic, I'm planning on putting out a bit more of a detailed overall roundup of kind of what I've talked about today, hopefully with potentially with even more examples, because I'm terrible at remembering everything off the top of my head. So that will hopefully be like quite an in-depth, helpful article to pop out there. And I also try and get to as many conferences and meetups, networking events as I can. So yeah, if you spy me at any of those coming up, I used to say I'm the one with the black and white hair, but I've recently changed it. So it's now red and pink. So yeah, look out for, if you see someone with half and half hair, it might well be me, depending on what colors are going on at that time. But check my LinkedIn, maybe I'll start putting like an update of what color my half and half hair is at some point, so people can recognize me easily.
Yeah, I feel like we'll need that depending on when people are watching or listening to this, so they know, so they're not looking for the wrong hair colors. But yeah, Alison, thank you so much for your time today. It was a really great conversation. Thanks also to everyone out there watching and listening as well. And as always, we will see you in the next episode.